What's up, everybody? Cewpins here, and we are back with some more MMA fight picks. We are taking another look at UFC 251 Usman versus Masvidal. I've already looked at the early Fight Pass prelims and the ESPN prelims, so this is going to be a look at the main card, aka the pay-per-view. This main card is stacked. Even with Jorge Masvidal stepping in for Gilbert Burns last minute, I think that actually makes the card more exciting. I don't know anybody who's bummed about Masvidal stepping in, but let's take a look at the fights here. We have Amanda Ribas taking on Paige VanZant. This should be an interesting fight because it has the largest odds difference on the fight. Paige VanZant is the biggest underdog of the night. Another bout between Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas. This is a rematch, and I believe Rose Namajunas, who lost the first fight, is the favorite in the fight. Another bantamweight title fight. We have 3 title fights here, guys. We have Petr versus Jose Aldo. This should be interesting. Jose Aldo all the way down at bantamweight. Let's see if he can get a title there. We have a bout between Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. This is another rematch. However, the previous winner, Volkanovski, is also the betting favorite right now. And lastly, the main event between Kamaru, Usman, and Jorge Masvidal. I am very excited for this fight. More excited than I was for the Burns fight. We are going to see a lot of great fights on UFC 251. But let's take a look at each one individually. The main card is opening with a women's flyweight bout between Paige VanZant and Amanda Ribas. And this fight is interesting because it has the widest odds on the card. Amanda is about a minus 850, minus 900 favorite, depending on which sports book you're looking at. But looking at the other stats, these girls are the same age, they're the same height, have about the same reach, and they both have a lot of fights at strawweight, which is 115 pounds. So I actually have a tiny little bet on Paige VanZant, which I got at plus 575. I don't think she should be this big of an underdog, and the fight's going to be a lot closer than people think. Paige VanZant is 8-4, and she trains with Team Alpha Male. And if we take a look at her record, she has some pretty impressive wins in the UFC. She has some finishes, and she has some decision wins, and she has fought some high-level opponents. Her losses include Jessica Rose Clark, Michelle Waterson, who's one of the best female fighters in my opinion, and Rose Namajunas, who is very good at that weight class. So she has some wins, she has some losses, but she does have a mix of abilities. Paige VanZant has some decent striking, some decent grappling, she has some wrestling ability, and she has that Team Alpha Male base where she knows to look for takedowns at the end of the fight, at the end of the round, to try to score points. So if we take a look at her record here, there are some names you might recognize: Kylan Curran, Felice Herrig, Alex Chambers, names like that. She does have a mixed bag of wins and losses here, but I think that's why this fight's going to be a lot closer than people think. So Amanda Ribas over here, 9-1. She has a few fights in the UFC, including decision wins over Randa Marcos, Mackenzie Dern, and a finish over Emily Whitmire. She got her with a rear naked choke. And then all of her other fights are outside of the UFC. We don't have a lot of information on some of these, but she was finished by Polyana Viana, and she doesn't have any other losses. So her only loss comes by finish. I think this fight's going to be a lot closer than people think. I don't believe that Amanda Ribas is just going to absolutely steamroll the fight. I don't think either girl has the chance to do that. But I think it's going to be a lot closer than a lot of people think, and I am counting on Paige VanZant to squeak out a split decision here. The next fight is a strawweight bout between Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas. And this one is actually a rematch where Andrade won the first fight. But if you look, she's actually the underdog here. A lot of people were saying that Rose Namajunas was winning the fight until she got finished. And I guess people don't think that she's going to get finished again because Namajunas is a pretty decent favorite here. Minus 210 is the average, I believe. Minus 220, I'm seeing even more over here. So both these girls are about the same age, but Rose Namajunas is 3 inches taller and has a 3-inch reach advantage. Andrade actually used to fight at 135 pounds, but she had trouble keeping up. There's just a huge difference in size between some of those some of those girls at bantamweight. But let's take a closer look at their records here. Jessica Andrade is 20-7. Like I said, she did fight at 35. I think her last fight was against Pennington at 35. So the rest of these are all at 115. She has some decent wins over Penny, Calderwood, Hill. She has a decision loss to Joanna, and she has a decision win over Gedalia Torres. She finished Carolina, and she finished Rose. She finished her with a slam in their first fight, but she went on to fight Weili Zhang for the title and didn't win. Rose Namajunas is 8-4. She trains out of Colorado, and I believe all of her fights are at 115. Her most recent fight is that loss to Jessica Andrade, which we talked about, and she does have some other impressive wins. She beat Joanna twice in a row. The first time she beat her with the first round finish. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was a crazy fight. I didn't expect it to happen. And then came through with the rematch, went the distance with Joanna, who's one of the greatest fighters. We all know this. She went the distance with Joanna and won the decision there. She has wins over Waterson, who I think is one of the best female fighters. If they had a 105-pound division in the UFC, Waterson would be the champ. Split decision loss to Carolina, which that one was pretty close. Wins over Torres, VanZant. I mean, we've seen a lot of these fights in the past. She has a pretty good ability to win the fight. She has excellent striking, excellent grappling, and she just makes stuff happen. I don't have any bets on this fight. I'm not really leaning either way on the fighters, but I am kind of leaning on no decision for this fight. I think these girls are just going to go out there and get after it. Next up, we have our first title fight of the night. We are going to watch Petr take on Jose Aldo for the vacant 135-pound belt. This is a very interesting fight because a lot of people are so surprised at Jose Aldo being able to make bantamweight. I'm surprised still. I don't know. He used to struggle to make featherweight, and it seems like it's easier for him to make bantamweight, which is 10 pounds lighter. But we have Petr is the favorite here. He's a pretty moderate favorite, and we have a little bit of an age gap. Aldo is 6 years older and has a 3-inch reach advantage. The height is about the same, and we do know that Aldo used to be the featherweight king. Most of his fights are at 145. So Petr is 14-1, and if we take a look at his record here, his only professional loss is to a split decision in 2016. So one of the judges thought he won it, and he avenged that loss later by getting the decision here. We can see on the record. His only other loss came as an amateur, it looks like, that I can see. He got finished by Gioga Shamatava. If I'm Jose Aldo, I'm calling up Goga, being like, all right, bro, where did you hit him? How did he go out? But look at these wins here. Petr has some very impressive wins. He finished Uriah Faber, has a decision win over Jimmy Rivera, a decision over John Dodson. He stopped Douglas Andrade. It's a corner stoppage, doesn't really count. But lots of UFC wins. I mean, hasn't lost in the UFC and only has one split decision loss as a professional. This is a pretty impressive record. And one thing that's worth noting is Petr is a master of boxing, which means he has hundreds of boxing fights. He has really great hands. He's going to be ready for this fight on the feet. Jose Aldo is arguably one of the greatest featherweights of all time. He was the WEC featherweight champion, and he was the UFC featherweight champion for the longest time. He has a 28-6 record, and there's some very impressive fights on his career. He's one of the best strikers. He's got really great leg kicks, really great combinations. He has some very underrated grappling. He's an all-around great fighter, but he's been having an interesting go at it lately. After losing to Connor, it was just kind of a slippery slope for him. He has just a mixed bag of fights here. He has a win over Frankie Edgar, a couple losses to Max Holloway in a row, and then a couple of wins at featherweight before losing at featherweight to Volkanovski. And then that's when he decided to drop down to 135, and he fought Marlon Moraes at 135 for his first bantamweight bout. Looked like he made the weight cut easy, but was unable to win the fight and lost by split decision. He did well in that fight. Some people thought he won the fight, and it really shows you his ability at 135. He might do a little better this time after having a little bit of experience at the weight. Maybe it takes a little bit of time to get used to. You gotta wait for those calories to settle. But before he lost to Conor, I mean, look at all these wins. Wins over Mendez, Lamas, Chan Sung Jung, Frankie Edgar, Mendez again. I mean, he was unbeatable for the longest time. I am always excited to see Jose Aldo fight, but this is going to be interesting. It doesn't look like Petr is... It doesn't look like Petr is going to lose this one, but we never know. I mean, it's Jose Aldo. I think Jose Aldo's only chance at winning is by finish. I don't know if he's going to have the ability to go 5 rounds with Petr. So we'll see. I don't have any bets locked in on this fight, but it would be nice to see Jose Aldo win. That's why I'm going to avoid betting on it, because we're going to bet what we want instead of what we think. This is going to be an interesting one. I'm excited to see it. I might be leaning on no decision. Our next title fight and co-main event is a bout between Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway for the featherweight world title. Now, this one is a rematch, and Volkanovski did win the first fight by a unanimous decision. So they went the distance before, and I think they might do it again here. Volkanovski is 3 years older and about 5 inches shorter, which was pretty noticeable in the first fight. But if you look at the reach, he actually has a longer reach. So it kind of balanced out, and it didn't make it seem like he had to leap in and clear a lot of distance to get in on Max. One thing worth noting is Max Holloway did say he has been doing most of his training over Zoom calls because he hasn't been allowed to go to the gym in Hawaii. So a lot of people have been talking about that. Alexander Volkanovski has a really impressive career. He is 21-1 as a professional, and I believe he has 8 fights, all wins in the UFC. Hasn't lost in the UFC. His only loss ever, the one on his career, came in 2013 to Corey Nelson, and since then has been on an absolute tear, finishing guys left and right until he joined the UFC. And he has some pretty impressive wins in the UFC. Wins over Darren Elkins, Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, and of course Max Holloway, who he's facing on the 11th at UFC 251. So I think this is going to be an interesting fight. We did see a really great display of skills from Volkanovski the first time around. So I'm excited to see how the rematch goes. Max Holloway is 21-5 in his pro career, and if we look at his UFC record, he has some very impressive wins over some very impressive names. A finish over Brian Ortega, a pair of wins over Jose Aldo, a win over Anthony Pettis, Ricardo Lamas, Jeremy Stevens, Charles Oliveira, Cub Swanson. I mean, the list goes on. There are a lot of excellent fighters on Max Holloway's record, and he's beat them all. I would say his list of opponents is probably more impressive than Volkanovski's if we were to compare them side by side. So just looking at this, he's only lost decisions recently. The decision to Volkanovski and the decision to Poirier, which was at 155 pounds. He stepped up trying to work his way into getting the interim title and wasn't able to pull a decision against Dustin Poirier, who we just saw have an amazing performance not too long ago. But looking way back on his record, he's only been finished once, and that was by Dustin Poirier in 2012. And he has a split decision loss to Dennis Bermudez and then a decision loss to Conor McGregor back in 2013. So our guy Max Holloway hasn't been finished really. It's been years since he's been finished. I see the fight going the distance, but is he able to take control of the fight this time? Are we going to see a higher output from Max? Are we going to see a different strategy into this? Were those Zoom call training sessions what he needed to win this fight? I'm not sure. I don't really have a bet on this fight. I'm not really leaning either way. I would like to see Max win. It's really hard for me to pick because Volkanovski just has a great set of skills and he was able to win the first fight. So I do like Max, but I don't have a bet on this. I'm not really leaning either way on this. This fight to me is a pass. I usually pass on a couple of fights, and those are the fights I'm more interested in watching. So this is one of those fights I'll probably not place any bets on, and we'll just see how it goes. And finally, the main event, we have Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal, who is replacing Gilbert Burns. And I don't know anyone that's not more excited for this matchup. There is not a soul out there that is bummed to watch Jorge Masvidal fight. This is going to be an interesting one. We have the BMF champion over here versus the welterweight champion. Both guys are in their 30s. Usman's 33, Masvidal's 35. Both guys are about the same height, and Usman does have the reach advantage. He's an inch taller, but has 4.5 inches of reach. And he's been doing a lot of training with Justin Gaethje in Denver lately. This is going to be an interesting fight. And a lot of people think that Jorge Masvidal is coming off the couch for this, but he has been training for a fight. He has been Dustin Poirier's main training partner. He has been keeping up, keeping in shape, and he is going to be ready for this fight. He has fought in the past at 155 pounds, so I don't think he's going to have an issue making weight. I really like this matchup. Usman did open as a 3-1 favorite, and the odds are kind of moving up and down around that line, but they're still about where they open. So I would say Usman probably closes as around a 3-1 favorite, and Masvidal looks like a plus 220, 245 underdog in some places. Not bad. The welterweight champion, Kamaru Usman, the Nigerian nightmare. He is 16-1 in his pro career and has a lot of impressive wins. He's been training in Denver with Justin Gaethje lately, working on his striking. I've seen some impressive videos, and he just looks really in shape. He beat Tyron Woodley for the title in a decision and has a finish over Colby Covington. He finished him in the 5th round. Also has wins over RDA, Demian Maia, Emil Meek, Sergio Moraes, Sean Strickland, Warley Alves. There's some impressive names on here. He's beat a lot of decent fighters, and his only loss comes to a rear naked choke loss in 2013. Jose Caceres was able to get him back then. But Usman fought on The Ultimate Fighter, has some impressive wins. He's what a lot of people would call a proper champion. He has a really good skill set, he's got excellent grappling, and his striking has been improving. Every time we see him go out, he's better at striking. And his wrestling is some of the best in the welterweight division. And our challenger, Jorge Masvidal, 35-13, has a very impressive UFC career and has a very impressive fight career. He has been fighting forever. He was even doing backyard fights with Kimbo Slice on YouTube years ago. I mean, let's take a look at some of the names on his record. Nate Diaz, Darren Till, Donald Cerrone, Stephen Thompson, Demian Maia, Benson Henderson. He's fought a lot of very high-level opponents. He took out Nate Diaz for the BMF title. He took out Ben Askren in like 2 seconds with that flying knee. He beat Darren Till, who dropped down the welterweight. We don't know why. And has a lot of decision losses over high-level guys like Stephen Thompson, one of the best welterweights of all time. Demian Maia, one of the greatest grapplers of all time. Split decision losses. Most of his losses, it looks like in the UFC, are by split decision. There's 3-4 of them in a row here. So we do see that Jorge is hard to finish, but it's still possible. I don't know if Usman's going to be the guy to finish him, but it's still possible. It's worth looking at. I think this fight could go the distance. I believe Jorge Masvidal is going to have the ability to go the 5-round distance. I just don't know who's really going to have the cardio advantage. Usman should be well prepared for this fight, but Masvidal has also been preparing for a fight. So I don't think his cardio is going to be very far behind. If it's behind at all, we'll see. Usman is training out of Denver and Masvidal is training out of Florida, so there's that mile high versus the sea level cardio advantage, if you think that'll be a factor. So when this fight was Usman versus Gilbert Burns, I had a nice bet on Usman, and I have a small bet on him over Jorge Masvidal. I grabbed it as a futures bet at minus 260, and I don't know if I want to put any more on that. I think Usman has a good shot at winning. He's going to have the wrestling advantage. He has some excellent striking, and I think Masvidal really can only win in the first couple of rounds. I think the cardio should favor Usman here. He should be able to grind him out for the full 5 rounds. I don't know if Usman gets finished, and I think Masvidal's only chance is if he gets that finish in the first couple of rounds, maybe the 3rd one. But I think if he doesn't get the finish by the 2nd round, it's most likely Usman's fight. The over might be a good bet here. I don't see Masvidal getting finished. I don't know if Masvidal is going to have the ability to finish Usman here, but it's very possible. If anybody could do it, it's Jorge Masvidal. Thank you for checking out my UFC 251 picks. I have my other picks for the early prelims and the ESPN prelims on the channel, so if you want to go back and check those out, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more content in the future. And if you want to see my live UFC companions, I watch the fights while I stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/Cewpins. And check out the description, I'll have all my socials in there. Follow me everywhere.